The other thing is copying. You see this a lot in church. People just mimicking what other people say, just doing what other people are doing, even though they don't believe it, understand it. There was a story about a little girl who was in a Baptist church. She was 7, and her mom insisted that she be baptized. Usually they baptize people a little bit older, but the mom insisted, and we're like that, us preachers. We sometimes have a hard time saying no, and so they baptized her. And just as, he's bringing her over to the baptismal font and all that, and getting ready to put her in there, and he looked at her and he said, "Now, will you confess? Please do your confession," which they had to do publicly. And she said, "Well, for many years now, I've been wallowing deep in sin." This little 7-year-old girl. Everybody started laughing. They said, "What?" They knew that these weren't her words, that she was just mimicking what the adults were saying and what she'd heard other people doing and saying. And so, it just became really clear that that's so often in religion. We're reciting creeds and reciting things and little expressions and cliches that we hear about God and about this and about that, even if we don't believe them or don't understand them. We've got to just get rid of that, because there's something more, something truer, something more authentic when we talk about being on a spiritual path. One of the other big problems in our world is idolatry. And I think I got to start on talking about idolatry here with these kinds of things. Idolatry is anything that when we feel certain that we understand what God is, this grand mystery that we're a part of, that we start to fall into idolatry. People think, it's funny that everything in this world is uncertain. We don't know anything for certain in this world except the fact that we're going to die someday. We don't know when we're going to die, but we know we're going to die. We live in a world of uncertainty, and yet people, when it comes to God, one of the greatest mysteries of all, they're so certain. They're certain there's no God, or they're certain there is a God, and this is exactly how God works. And people argue over it, and people run airplanes into buildings over it, and people protest parades that, for kids' enjoyment over it. And all kinds of things that people do because of this sort of idolatry, this certainty that people feel. And so it's really important that we know that if we think we've arrived on the spiritual journey, that's when we know for sure we're lost. If you think you've arrived, then you can be certain you're lost. So putting aside the idolatries that we have and remembering that, there's a reason the second commandment in the 10 commandments, who knows you remember what the second commandment is? Thou shalt have no other, so at least one person reads the Bible on this. So thou shalt have no other gods besides me or before me. And so people, I know that's been criticized, even recently by the Sam Harris, who's written these books on Letter to the Christian Nation and all these things. And I've enjoyed some of the things he's written. I think he's had some very interesting and in some cases important critique, but then he goes over the top on things like that. He has no understanding or conception of what this means in the biblical sense. So if you think about that, what he's saying is, what the Bible says in that commandment, for example, someone like Sam Harris, the author, an atheist, will say, well, that's just a jealous God. Why would God be so jealous? Why would God care? And we're just making God in our own image, just like a human being, because we're jealous. But what we don't realize is what that statement says is, hold nothing as the highest truth in your life if it's not. Don't sacrifice for it. Don't devote your life to it if it's not worthy of your devotion, if it's not worthy of your sacrifice. Make sure that whatever you're devoting yourself to is really worthy of your one precious life. And so that's what the idea against idolatry is, to make sure your God concept is not too small, and so that we can open up those ideas, and I hope that you will this year. Now, another thing is that people are afraid they're going to offend God. If they ask questions, if they have doubts, if they get angry with God. And most people get angry with God sometimes. And the thing is, God is strong. God can take it. That's the thing. The truth can take our questions. The truth can take our uncertainty and our doubts, not to worry about it. To be in a real relationship with whatever that is that you understand to be truth, whatever you understand to be God, be real. If you're mad, be mad. I love the Jews for that. Jews have no problem being mad at God and telling God how they feel. I love that movie, The Apostle. Some evangelical Christians have the same ability to get mad at God. You remember Robert Duvall? He got nominated for an Oscar for that movie. That was a fantastic scene in that movie when he's mad at God. He's in this 3-story house. He's up in the attic. His mother's on the second story trying to get asleep. He's about 60 years old. His mom's about 80. And he's up there and he's, banging around and he's yelling at God. And he's, God, they've taken my wife. They've taken my church. God, what have I done? God, I'm a servant. I'm your servant, God. I've always called you Jesus, God. You've always called me Sonny, God. What should I do, Jesus? It's Sonny now talking. Do I lay hands on myself? What should I do? I'm mad at you, God. I'm mad at you. I love you, but I'm mad at you, God. Give me peace. Give me peace, God. What do I need to do? I'm confused. I'm mad. I love it. He's stomping around. His mom's, underneath. She's obviously used to it. She didn't even wake up until the phone rings. You remember this in the movie? The phone rings. It's the neighbor. Hey, what is going on over there in your house? It sounds like someone's going crazy. You got a crazy man up in your attic or something. And she says, oh, that's my son, Sonny. Ever since he was a little bitty boy, sometimes he talks to the Lord, and sometimes he yells at the Lord. And tonight he just happens to be yelling at the Lord. And then she just hangs up and looks up and smiles as the floorboards are moving above her. We can get mad at God. It's a real relationship. Things happen. I think of Mother Teresa. There's a story about her going to Haiti for the very first time in her life to see some of the poverty there. And her host took her to one of the worst, most impoverished slums of Haiti. And she just saw the deprivation and the kids and the starvation and the illness. And it was really hard to look at. And her host said, what kind of God would do this? You believe in a God that would create a world that has this? And Mother Teresa said, I have to tell you, when I finally meet my Maker, I got a lot of questions for him. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, right? And some people think that Mother Teresa lived so long because every time she got sick and she was about to die, God's up there thinking, I'm not ready to answer her questions. You know? We can get mad at God. The greatest saints, the people who are most spiritual, they get mad. They ask questions. They have doubts. That's part of the journey. But let's be on the journey with what's true and what's real. And speaking of journeys, I've talked a lot about the trip I took when I was a young adult in my 20s, traveling around the world and things. But one of the trips, kind of a precursor to that I've never really shared with this congregation, but when I was 19, I did a hitchhiking trip across the country. It was my sophomore year of college, and I took 8 weeks in the summer. And my brother dropped me off on the side of the New Jersey Turnpike with a small little backpack and a sleeping bag and $200 in my pocket. And I just started hitchhiking, and I went all the way across the United States, down into Texas, and I went into New Mexico, and I went to the Grand Canyon. I went into Mexico and up through California, all the way up to Seattle, and then came back down through South Dakota and Montana, and eventually got back to Chicago where my mother lived and where I grew up. And it was 2 months, 90 days. I came back with $20 in my pocket, and if you do the math, it's $3 a day. So you can imagine, even in 1988, living on $3 a day in the United States, that meant that I had to sleep under bridges, sometimes eat out of dumpsters, eating a lot at the Salvation Army and food kitchens and church pantries. And I just lived. I wanted to see what it was like to live, with homeless people, to do that. And people were wonderful to me. Some of the homeless men and women that I met on that trip just took care of me. And I remember one time I was going to sleep on the side of a church where a lot of people will sleep, sort of in the hedges. And this gentleman came over to me and said, this is a bad place to sleep because these gutters are broken and there's some, the rain comes down. If it does rain, it's going to pour right under there. You're going to get all wet. You want to come around to this side of the church. And so I did, and there were some other people there. And people would tell me, we're sleeping under a bridge, and they say, this guy over here, he's a little crazy. He sometimes sleeps with a knife. You might want to stay away and pay attention. And so there was sort of a network of folks talking to each other, runaways and other people who were kind of out on the road at that time. And I was just, for me, it was an experience of really checking in on, can I really believe that everybody's a child of God? And can I survive in this world on my own and in this way? And it was a truly profound experience. But the difference between what most of the people who were there were going through and what I was going through was I always knew there was more. I always knew that I could go home to my parents. I always knew that college would start up again at the end of the summer, and that I was going to move forward with my college career, and that I had a house that I could go home to and love from people who cared about me, and I could get some medical care if I needed it, right? So all that, so it was very different. We live our lives very differently when we know that there's more, when we know that there's possibilities. And so that's become a spiritual orientation for me on my own journey, is I keep in mind that there's always more. There's always more love. There's always more to learn. It's that idea that no matter what agony I'm going through, no matter what's troubling me, that I just have in my mind, there's something more. And then I live a little differently in this moment, in this struggle, in this trauma, in this aggravation, differently because I know that it's not the end of the story, that there's something more, that I'm not at the end of my journey. And that is truly a profound way to be in life and to be alive, this sense that there is more. There is always gonna be more. So for the spiritual journey, as we launch this month, talking about God, I want us to think about how, it's sort of like being a child in the back seat of your parents' car on a long road trip when you're a kid. And the kids are always asking, "Are we there yet?" And what's the answer? The answer is always, "No," right? There's more. There's more. We're not there yet. And that's what the spiritual journey always is. When we think we've arrived, when we think we know what God's like, and we're so sure about what God's name is and how God likes to be called and how God likes to be prayed to and all these kind of things, we got to say, no, there's more. We don't know for sure. So that whatever we're going through, when we think that we understand the mystery of God, the answer is no, there's more. When we think that I'm at the end of my rope, the answer is no, there's more. When I think that this is God's will for my life, and I know God's will for my life, the answer is no, there's more, because there's always more. And we need to keep the beginner's mind and the child's mind open, especially when we're talking about the greatest mystery ever known to human beings. This is the mystery that has changed cultures and shaped peoples and ethnicities and groups all throughout history. So we know that we have a physical nature, and we know that we have an emotional and psychological and intellectual nature, but some people forget we also have a spiritual nature, some part of ourselves that we call the spirit. It's a great mystery, but it needs to be nurtured. It needs to be brought attention to, some awareness of, that we are spiritual beings. Some people say that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience, right? But there is a spirit that dwells within us, and whenever we think that we felt all of God's love, the answer is no, there's more. Whenever we think that I've lived my purpose in this life, the answer is no, there's more. And I'm saying that in a congregation where I'm cognizant of the fact that we have, in our first service almost every Sunday, a woman who's 101 years old. Ruth Stout is 101 years old. She's still on the journey. Her purpose isn't accomplished. As long as we have breath, as long as we're still alive and here, there's more that we can do, and there's more possibilities. There's a woman who joined this church. I don't know if she's here now. I'm not sure. She wasn't in the 10 o'clock service. She's 110 years old. Are you here? If you're here, just raise your hand. I don't see you. She's 110. She just joined the church this fall. Think about it. She's on a journey. It never ends. 110, and she's still on the journey. So let's remember that life is a journey. It's an incredible adventure. It's our one chance. It's our one time that we're going to be here living this life with all this hope and all this possibility and all this potential for love. Let's soak up the love that we have in our lives. Let's look for it and seek it and plumb it and know that there's always more love. There's always more truth. There's always more hope. Always more, and that's what makes this life so beautiful. There's more than we've ever imagined. So let's, this month, keep your heart open, keep your mind open, so that in the weeks ahead that you can conceive of a deeper truth than you ever knew was possible. May it be the truth that sets you free. God bless you. Amen.